Room 21 Rockstars. So, as I promised yesterday in class, I am going to have a little bit of a review right now for social studies. If you're interested, if you want a little bit more practice for our Unit 1 assessment that is on Monday, coming right up. You guys have been doing so well all week, going home and studying a little bit each night. As I can tell from the pop quizzes that I gave all week, you guys did really well with them. So that proves to you that with a little bit of practice, you'll be pros with this material. And we want to put it into that long-term memory rather than just having it sit there on our head, memorize it all, and then forget it. So, a couple things that you can do to help you with that. I'm going to go through all the different concepts that we learned this unit and a couple of different things that I would do at home if I was studying and ways that I studied in high school and college that were successful for me. So, to begin with, we just have to review the continents and oceans. I know most of you know exactly where those are and everything, but there might be a few questions on Monday like that. So what I would do is just grab a sheet of computer paper. It could be a pizza box, the back of a pizza box, a cardboard. It could be a cereal box, anything that you can write on, basically. As long as you don't write on the wall or something that your parents are going to be angry with. So you draw a circle right on it like this. And it doesn't have to be anything pretty. You know Mr. Reichard is not an artist in any way, shape, or form. So I take my marker, and now I'm just going to draw out the continents as I know them in that circle. So, bear with me. Just draw something that looks like North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, Antarctica. Something like that. Not very pretty, but you are getting down the location of the continent exactly. And then you can go and actually label them. So this would be North America, South America, Europe, Africa, Asia's up here, and Australia, and then Antarctica. And then in between there, you can label each of the oceans. And if you're not sure about where these things are, you can actually turn to page 2 and 3 in your social studies textbook. And there's a really good map with all of the continents and the oceans that will be a good practice for you, as well as on page number 9. The continents and oceans are also on page 9 if you need some help with that. This is a good way to test your knowledge, especially if you don't have anyone to help you to study. You can do this totally on your own. Draw out the map, really rough sketch, and just label them in. And if you're missing maybe one, do it again, or do it another time, or maybe mix it up this time and have the names and draw the continents around. Any way that you can get the continents and oceans, and you can also sing the song that we sang in class the other day, North America, South America. You guys know that one. So, that is for continents and oceans. Now, for longitude and latitude. Remember, latitude, you're climbing the ladder. So the lines of latitude go east and west. And longitude is up and down. They're long, so those are north and south. So latitude, we're climbing the ladder. Latitude, fatitude. And longitude is long, okay? Actually do the hand motions. It'll help you to remember the difference between latitude and longitude. Trust me, you may look a little silly, but you'll get it down. You can also play Battleship, which we put the Battleship game into our binders way back when we played it. And if you have somebody at home to play that with you, you can place your ships on the board, and then somebody else can call the coordinates. Okay? Remember, when we're writing lines of latitude and longitude, we always want to put down the north or south coordinates, and then the east and west coordinate. Okay, so that's good practice for that. And you can also find a little bit more information about latitude and longitude on pages 8 and 9 in your textbook if you want to read up a little bit on latitude and longitude. Just remember, latitude, we're climbing the ladder. The lines run east and west. Longitude, the lines are long. They're running north to south. Okay? Now, we're going to move on to the land features, and if you actually turn in your book, there's a really great page on I-1. It's way at the beginning. We looked at it way back when we made our salt dough maps. And this is a great map because what you can actually do is cover the bottom with a piece of paper, and everything is numbered up above. So you can practice actually saying, okay, this is a peninsula, and a peninsula is a piece of land that's surrounded on 3 sides by water and connected on 1 side by land. Okay, so a quick review for that as well. If you have somebody at home, they can actually look at these different landforms on the bottom and ask you, what is a gulf? What is a mountain? What is a river? What is a lake? Okay, you do want to make sure you're practiced up on those. I think we're pretty strong on those, but if you feel a little Iffy on those, make sure you look on pages I and I1, way in the front of your book before the table of contents, actually. Okay, now, to move on to the regions, number one, you could sing our song. Like I said, our song has everything you need to know about every single one of the regions in it. So on Monday, if I hear you singing the song, that's quite all right because it's going to help you to remember the 8 regions of North America. But another great way to practice the 8 regions at home this weekend would actually just be get another piece of paper, a pizza box, anything to draw on. Draw a rectangle divided into 7 chunks. They don't have to be equal parts. We're not working with fractions, but just 7 equal parts. As you can see, my rectangle looks really bad, but it's just so I can get those across. And then what you actually want to do is mark one side as the Atlantic Ocean and one side as the Pacific Ocean. So I'm going to mark right here is the Atlantic, and right here is the Pacific. Okay, because as you can see, Atlantic and Pacific, because we know that the regions go in order. We can't just have them in any odd order. So imagine that this rectangle is actually North America right now. Okay, and if you want further reference on that, you can actually turn to page. Bear with me while I turn to my page in my textbook. On page 21 is that great North American map with the regions. Or you can use our giant foldable that's in your Social Studies Interactive Notebook. That is also really great. Now, what I would do is I would go through and name each of the regions. So we know starting at the Atlantic and inward, here is now my completed project. I have the coastal plain, the Appalachian Highlands, interior lowlands, Great Plains, they lie flat, increasing in elevation, Rocky Mountains, rugged mountains, they're young mountains, the Basin and Range with the lowest point in NA, which is Death Valley, and the coastal range. And don't forget about the Canadian Shield way up here in the shape of a horseshoe around the Hudson Bay. Now, what I also did was just draw a quick picture in there so I can visualize in my mind what does the land look like in each of these regions. So if you look at the coastal plain, I have the ocean with just a tiny bit of land. It's really flat. That's where we live. Tons of harbors, remember, for boats to come in. It's perfect for ports and different things like that. The Appalachian Highlands are mountains, but remember, they're really old and eroded, so they look more like hills. Okay, if you go right over into the Blue Ridge Mountains in Virginia, those are part of the Appalachian Highlands like we talked about in class. Then we have the interior lowlands. The land is just a little bit hilly. It starts to flatten out, but there are many rivers in the interior lowlands like our song says. Then we have the Great Plains, totally flat, great for farming. That's where all the early settlers went for farming, right into the interior lowlands and Great Plains because it's really fertile soil. Okay, but remember, as our song says, the Great Plains begin to increase in elevation as we get to the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains are really rugged. The tops are always snow-covered year-round, and they're the youngest mountain range in North America and also really big. Think about that map we looked at last week where you could see how dark and brown the Rocky Mountains were as compared to the Appalachian Highlands. And then we get to the Basin and Range. Remember, that word we talked about, the isolated mountains all through there with a bunch of holes or bowls, basins throughout. So you have a mountain here and a mountain there and then really big basins or bowls. And Death Valley, which is the lowest point in North America. Not many trees there like we talked about. It's more desert-like. And then we get to the Coastal Range, which is actually another mountain range. And remember, the beaches on the west coast are not really great because they're rocky and the land is really high up, so you have really big cliffs that go down into the beaches. And we can't forget about the Canadian Shield right up in here that wraps like a horseshoe around the Hudson Bay. The Canadian Shield in the southern part, remember, we kind of have to divide it in half. So the southern part is actually really wooded, tons of pine forests, tons of animals, but then when you get to the northern part, that's where we have tundra, and it's totally cold. There's nothing there except a few animals. There are no trees. It's just really snow-covered. So the Canadian Shield, northern part is tundra, southern part is deciduous wooded forest. Okay, so after you create your rectangle, label the regions, draw in your pictures, think about our blog post that we did this week where I had you describe as if you were taking a trip the whole way across North America, what it would look like as you were traveling. Now I want to work on those directions that we practiced on Friday because, like I said, this is the toughest part of the entire unit. So what I did is I drew a compass rose at the bottom, Okay, and right now I'm going to ask you a few questions, so get this map ready. And you can pause the video if you're not quite caught up to here. But here we go. So remember, if I draw my compass rose on the page and they're asking me to describe the location of a place in comparison to another place, I just use my finger. So check this out. So if I want to say the Great Plains are what of the Rocky Mountains? So here are the Great Plains. I look at my compass rose. I put my finger on the Rocky Mountains. I move them to the Great Plains. What direction did I move on the compass rose? I moved east, as you can see right here. So the Great Plains are east of the Rocky Mountains. Now, are you ready for one? Because here we go. So tell me, is the Basin and Range east or west of the coastal range? The Basin and Range, is it east or west of the coastal range? Use your finger and compass rose. Think about it. Love that effective effort. Okay, so Basin and Range, east or west. What is it? When my hand goes down. Okay, it is east. Look, check that out, because I put my finger on the coastal range, I move it to the Basin and Range. That is east, according to my compass rose. Okay, here's one more. Tell me, are the interior lowlands east or west of the Appalachian Highlands? Are the interior lowlands east or west of the Appalachian Highlands? Think about it. Take a little bit of time. You've got this. Don't give up. Okay, that's right, they are west of the Appalachian Highlands. Check this out. So the interior lowlands, put my finger on the Appalachian Highlands, I take it over to the interior lowlands, I went west on my compass rose. Okay, so come Monday on the test, you might have to draw this rectangle out if there comes a question that's asking, describe the location of the Appalachian Highlands compared to the regions around it. So this is in your Social Studies Interactive Notebook, but I would suggest closing your notebook when you actually do this task at home one time to try to put it down and sing the song. Because remember, the way that we sing the song is actually the order of the regions from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. Okay? I think you guys really have the regions down. You just need to review, brush up, become a master with each of them. You can also go on KidBlog and check out other folks' posts to see and read about their journeys from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean, which would be another great review. And I'm actually going to try to go on KidBlog today and comment on everyone's posts from last week. Okay, now, you can also have someone else at home ask you, choose a location and say, are the Great Plains east or west of the interior lowlands? Are the Rocky Mountains east or west of the Great Plains? Is the coastal plain east or west of the Appalachian Highlands? That would be great, great practice. Another great area to go and practice for these directions is actually the review in the back of the book. In the back of Unit 1, which starts on page number 44. Remember, I said I'll give anyone a house point who completes that this weekend. I just put the answer key to that up on our Class Fusion page as a PDF file. So if you go under Documents, click Social Studies, and it'll say Unit 1 Review, you will be good to go. But do not look at that, like I said, before you complete it, because that's not going to help anyone. Look at it after you complete it, but there's a lot of good practice questions for those directions with the 8 regions of North America right on there. Okay, and finally, if you go to page 29 in your textbook, the Us Waterways. This was a thing that we were all a little shaky about, but on Friday, remember in guided reading, we made that pouch in our interactive notebook along with the fold-out map. So right now, or sometime this weekend, you really need to make the effort to take all those cards out and sort them to where the major rivers and waterways are in North America, and then tell what's so important about that river or waterway to U.S. history. Okay? Now, another great thing to do, and I'll actually review with you right now, I'm just going to say a couple of statements about the major river, oceans, waterways, and just tell me what waterway that is. Okay, so here's one example. This waterway forms a border between the United States and Mexico. Think about it. And the answer is right, the Rio Grande River. Okay, so if you just have somebody at home do that, you can take the cards out of the pouch in your Social Studies interactive notebook, sort them, or have somebody ask you, take those cards and say, okay, what river divides the U.S. and Mexico along the border, the Rio Grande River. And like I said, right now it might not make sense that we're learning about all of these waterways and just one thing about each of them. But this year, as we get into our social studies, all of these rivers and waterways are going to play a really important role in what we're learning. Here's another one. Ready? Okay, so these have, or here's my clue, I'm sorry. This provides access to other areas of the world by being used as highways for explorers, early settlers, and immigrants. I'll give you a hint. This is an ocean, 2 oceans. So it provided access to other areas of the world by being used as highways for explorers, early settlers, and immigrants. Think about it for a second. It's 2 oceans. There are only 2 oceans surrounding North America, boys and girls, and they are the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Remember, when anyone came over to the New World, they had to go across the Atlantic Ocean to get here. So that provided that was like the major highway to get here. Another example, this is a major transportation artery in the United States. It's a river. It has many tributaries that flow into it. It is called the Mississippi River. Okay, and remember we talked about the transportation arteries, and I gave you the example of a heart. We have our arteries that go into our heart. They're the most important blood vessels in our body. That is basically what the Mississippi River is to the United States and North America. It's one of the most important rivers because it goes north and south the whole way across the United States, and it has all of these major tributaries that flow into it. Remember how I told you that if I got into a canoe in my hometown of Clarion, jumped into a canoe, I would go the whole way down to the Ohio River, meet the Mississippi, and I could end up in the Gulf of Mexico if I never got out of that canoe, which is really cool. But think about how all those rivers, those tributaries, flow into one another. This is the longest tributary of the Mississippi River. I'll give you 2 options for this. Is it the Missouri River or the Ohio River? Right, it's the Missouri River. Remember, the Ohio River wasn't quite as long. It was called the Gateway to the West. The Missouri River was a little bit longer. It's a very big tributary for the Mississippi River. The Columbia River, why was it important? It's in the western part of the U.S. Yes, it was important for Lewis and Clark. That's the river they went down for their exploration, which I cannot wait to talk about later this year in social studies. Finally, the Gulf of Mexico. Why was it such an important body of water? Remember, a gulf is actually just a part of the ocean that's kind of set aside, surrounded by a lot of land. Right, it provided French and Spanish exploration routes to Mexico and other parts of the world. So this, boys and girls, is going to be the toughest part of your studying this weekend is rivers and waterways. Okay, we talked about that on Friday, but if you use the sort that's in your interactive notebook, have somebody ask you some questions like that, or if there's nobody there, just take out your cards that are in the pouch in your notebook, pull a card out, read. This provides access to other areas of the world by being used as highways for explorers, early settlers, and immigrants, and then sort it. What body of water is that? Yeah, the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so you do need to know where they're located, and you need to know the important fact about each of them, like we talked about. And page 29 in your textbook actually has a really great map with all of those major rivers and waterways. Okay, and you worked all week in guided reading this week with the main idea of all of those important waterways as well. Okay, so practice, 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 and you're going to do great on that. Couple of other questions I want you to think about. I'm not going to talk about the answer right now. They're in your textbook. We've talked about them in class. But the first question is, why were so many cities built along rivers and other waterways? I mean, if you think about Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, all of these major cities were built very close to a river or a waterway. Why was that? And think back to one of the group skits we did with the waterways. They were farming in the Appalachian Highlands, and it was old eroded rock. They weren't getting many crops, and they said that they had to go into the next region, into the interior lowlands and Great Plains. But how did they get there? Did they hike? Or how did they get there? Those are 2 major questions I want you to think about this weekend. We talked about them in class. You're in your textbook, so think about those as well. What I'm going to actually do is set up a blog post on Kid Blog if you want to get on this weekend. If you have any further questions, you can ask me. Remember, we're only talking about things related to school on the blog, and this blog post is going to be for questions or comments about social studies and the unit test. You can also email or call me if you have any questions. Take a little bit of time each day to study this, and you guys are going to do great. I'm really proud of you, all of the work you put in this week. Keep it up, and work hard. Get smart.